Hello and welcome. At Jesuit Communications, we talk to people who are making an impact, transforming people and communities. Today, I have the privilege to talk to one of the renowned author, Chris Lowney, who has published 8 books, and including Heroic Leadership, Make Today Matter, and Why Pope Francis Leads the Way He Leads, amongst other bestsellers. Chris, thank you very much and welcome.
That's my pleasure.
Thank you very much for talking to us and as you visit Zimbabwe and also to Arupe Jesuit University. How do you like it here?
It's great. I've been in East Africa, in Cote d'Ivoire, in South Africa, but this is my first time in Zim. And so it's really great to have the experience of meeting folks here, and especially in this university. There are Jesuits, I think maybe from 20 different countries. And so for an American like me, it's very interesting and inspiring to interact with so many different folks.
Let's talk about your writings. You have written 8 books, 6 by yourself since 2001. And part of those books include Heroic Leadership, Why Pope Francis Leads the Way He Leads. And part of that has got a central theme on Ignatian spirituality. Why is St. Ignatius and Ignatian spirituality key to in your writings?
Yeah, so maybe I could give 30 seconds of my own history to help answer the question you're asking me. So after secondary school, I joined the Jesuits myself. So I was 18 years old, and I stayed for a few years. And then I discerned that my path in life was not to be a Jesuit, and I did the next logical thing, which is to work at a big bank. So anyway, I left the Jesuits and I ended up working in banking. And while I was working at JP Morgan, sometimes I used to think or daydream when I reading some of these leadership books that would be circulated among managers in this big company. I would say, oh man, this stuff is superficial, not very useful, and somehow the formation I had as a Jesuit, in a way, was more relevant to life in JP Morgan than this stupid leadership book. So I somehow had the idea that it might be fun to try to write something that would try to take values and ideas that for Jesuits themselves would have very deep religious roots, and try to translate these ideas into language that would be accessible, of course, to people who are religious, but also to people of every different tradition and no tradition. Because, you know, if you work in a big company, as I was working, well, some people will be Catholic or Christian, but also Muslim people, Jewish people, atheists. And so I was somehow trying to think, could I translate some of these ideas in a way that people of any background could read it and say, oh, this is interesting and I understand it, and I can apply some of these ideas in my life and work.
And then you made Ignatian spirituality key in your writings.
Yeah, simply because I thought it's valuable, useful. You know, I was not trying to do a favor to the Jesuits or something. I just thought the ideas are very relevant, so I used them. And, you know, in a way, sometimes I thought that, in a way, Ignatius had the same problem that we all have in the 21st century, in a different way, because he was trying to invent, so to speak, a different kind of religious order. You know, in many religious orders before him were monastic mostly. And so, you know, if the monks are going to chapel multiple times each day, they have a way to keep recollecting themselves every day, huh? But his idea was that Jesuits would be much more active in the world. So he had to solve the problem that you have to solve, I have to solve, anyone has to solve. Namely, how do I be very active in the world without becoming totally caught up in the crazy flux of everyday things? You know, how do I step back and recollect myself, make good choices, and so on?
And today, leaders are thinking about how do we become great leaders in the 21st century. And would you say Ignatius is the saint for today and the future?
Is the saint for today and the future? Well, my friend, someday I may talk to a Dominican friend or Franciscan or Benedictine, so I can't say he is the saint. Huh? But joking aside, I think, yes, I find him very relevant for the reasons I just mentioned to you. You know, that he's somehow his spirituality, I think, is helping people to try to um, stay recollected in a busy, active world. And also, I think that he had, you know, you use in Jesuit lingo a word like discernment. But if I could translate it, I think he also has a lot of human wisdom about making good choices and decisions. You know, and let's face it, in the modern world, all of us have to make more and more choices and decisions because we're changing careers, things change, relationships change, and so on. And so I think that's another way in which he is very relevant for modern people. In other words, he has some really good know-how, some tools for how to make good choices.
In Zimbabwe, Jesuits are known for very good schools: St. Ignatius College, St. George's, Rupert Jesuit University, and in several other works. What do you think is valuable about Jesuits that people should learn and know, and that could help them about leadership?
Well, you know, let me make this observation. So I worked in JP Morgan. In JP Morgan and all big companies, sometimes just very few people are selected for leadership formation. You know, somehow you're picking out the very best and training only them, and the rest of the people, okay, good luck. But I always thought it interesting and curious that every Jesuit receives the same formation, spiritual exercises and so on. And so in my language, Ignatius doesn't use the word leadership, but somehow, as I would see it, because everybody is receiving the same formation, there's somehow an expectation that yes, each person has an opportunity and responsibility to show leadership and take leadership and so on. So I think that is a very relevant idea for people to consider in their own lives. Not like showing leadership in the sense of hierarchy only or being the boss or being the big man. I don't mean that. But I mean, even if you're a parent or in your relationships or whatever is your small jobs, how do we show leadership in ordinary life, daily life?
And then you wrote a book, Everyone Leads. And what does that mean?
In a way, well, that book was about, it's called, the full title is Everyone Leads, How to Revitalize the Catholic Church. And so in a way, it's an application to the church of some of the ideas I just explained to you. You know, those who are watching us, I guess most of them will somehow be in Africa, where the church here, thank God, is very vibrant, hopeful, growing. And I'm from the United States, where it's the opposite in every way, huh? I mean, we have a disastrous scenario, if I can speak very frankly, where almost every indicator is going down. And so that book I was writing for people everywhere, but especially to people in the global north, where the church is really declining and in a difficult situation. And I was trying to make the point that one, we're in an urgent situation, and two, the solution is not like some pope or some cardinal is going to somehow tell the answers, but each person, everyone leads. Each person must somehow step up and try to help address these challenges.
One of your popular books, Heroic Leadership, you raised principles of self-awareness, love, ingenuity, and heroism.
Correct.
Can you explain more on the aspect of ingenuity, and how can this help young people who are aspiring, to do great things, who want to change the face of Africa, transform the church, and how can they use this principle in this changing world?
Okay, so the source of those four ideas, of course, is the tradition of the Jesuits. And remember, I said when I wrote the book, my project was trying to find language and ideas that everybody could appreciate, self-awareness, heroism, ingenuity. Those are not Jesuit words, even if the roots somehow are related to the Jesuits. So now you ask about ingenuity, and my idea when I say ingenuity is that we're living in a world that, I'm sorry, it just keeps changing. And we can't sit around and wait for the world to be normal and slow down. we have to work in a world that will keep changing. And only people who themselves are able to keep adapting and changing are going to do well, are going to be effective leaders. And that's true in a school, in a family, in a church, in a country, whatever it is. And so I try to, one, make the point that you need to strive to be somebody who's open to change, able to cope with change, even able to lead change. And one of the great insights, I think, of Ignatian spirituality is this idea of being free inside yourself, internally free from the kinds of things that either could lead you into bad choices, or in this case, might hold you back from being able to change. So a big one is often people are afraid. Fear of failure, fear of making a mistake, fear of taking a risk when I make a choice. I'm not completely sure that I'm right, and so we need the inner freedom to be able to be ingenious, to be open to taking a risk, open even sometimes to making a mistake.
And what sort of leaders do you think today's world require? What sort of heroes do we want?
Well, when I talk about the idea of heroism in the book, what I mean is not heroism like I'm making myself famous or I'm a battle hero. Rather, the essence of heroism is somehow that I'm devoting my life to a purpose greater than myself. So that's, to me, the essence of it, that we need people who care about something bigger than themselves. It's not just about me, my ego, my power, my status, my salary, my money. Rather, I say, oh man, why am I here on earth? To serve my fellow humans. People who go to Jesuit schools know this little mantra of men and women for others, people for others, these kinds of ideas. A religious person might understand this in a deeply religious way. We're here not to serve ourselves, but to serve God's plan for humanity. But even somebody who's not religious could, I think, somehow understand that they're here not for themselves, but for a purpose greater than self. And I think, we're living in a world that has profound challenges, whether it's climate or drastic inequality or violence, the suffering and poverty of the few. And all of these things will only be solved by people who are committed to purpose greater than their own self.
In the context of leadership, 2013, a conclave elects Pope Francis. And then you write a book, Why Pope Francis Leads the Way He Leads. What was the idea behind that book?
Well, I'll give you just an honest answer. So it was not my idea to write that book, but Heroic Leadership was very successful,
Yes.
Thankfully. I'm grateful. And then when Pope Francis was elected, the publisher of that book said, oh, you wrote this book, and now...
Let's do another project.
Yeah, now actually a Jesuit is the leader, So why don't you write something about him? And what I tried to do, I don't know Pope Francis personally, what I tried to do was gather stories from his past life and his Jesuit life before being the Pope, and try to help people to understand how his life and his roots might explain some of the way he thinks about the world and so on. That's why it's Why He Leads the Way He Leads. In other words, his Jesuit spirituality and his life informs some of the ways he behaves as Pope. That was the idea of the book.
Okay. Almost 10 years later, what do you think about the Pope's leadership, considering what's happening in the world and how much his leadership, how much his Ignatian spirituality has helped him to do? Several books have been written about him, but as an author, what do you think about this leadership?
Well, maybe I could answer in two ways. One, to me, it's completely clear that he's been very true to his Jesuit spirituality. He's talking a lot about we need to become a discerning church, which is a new idea for a lot of people. This idea of I must try to listen carefully for God's Spirit. Where does God's Spirit want to lead the church? This is a new idea for many people to try to practice this. His care about those who have the least and are the least. So he's been very true to these ideas. And then if I could answer another way, I think practically speaking, you see some of the challenges of leading this church, at least in the North, where I come from, places like America. Even Catholics are getting very polarized, like politics. And so I think it's not very easy to bring together the whole community to move in the same direction, even if you're the Pope.
Yeah. And I mean, you earlier on spoke about what is happening in the church in America and several other world places. What do you think the church in Africa, where you said you observed that it's still very vibrant, can learn about what is happening in the world, and what leadership lessons can we draw from that?
Well, what can the church in Africa learn from, for example, my own U.S.? Well, I'd say a few things. One is Africa is becoming more and more prosperous. And one thing that we see very clearly is there tends to be a strong correlation between increasing prosperity and decreasing allegiance to religious institutions like church.
Okay,
So to me, this is a big yellow warning signal for the African church. In other words, don't take for granted that because you look out and you see so many people in the church, they will be there in 10 or 15 years. This to me is a big issue. Second thing I would say, which is a big yellow flashing warning sign for the African church, is when I go to church, I see a lot of, here in Africa, I see a lot of young people, young adults. In the United States, big trouble, big problems. Young adults really have just drifted away because many of the ways that the church speaks just don't speak to them personally compared to a lot of modern culture. And so another big warning issue for the church, I would say, here in Africa is can we keep speaking to these young people in ways that will be meaningful to them and they will continue to stay with us instead of slowly drifting away.
Thank you very much, Chris. But last question, do authors have, favorite books, or you love all your works?
Well, I don't love my own books. I don't think my books are so great. But on the other hand, I'm not sure I would have another book to recommend. I'd have to think about it. Yeah, there are many great authors and many great books.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And are we to expect any more books?
I hope at some point, but I don't have a great idea at the moment, so I'm not working on anything at the moment. But I would say this, I write every month a piece at Forbes.com, which somebody can access for free. And if you follow me on Facebook, I'm easy to find, or LinkedIn or Twitter, I'm easy to find, just my name, Chris Lowney. It's an unusual name, so it's easy to find me, or my website. Then you just let me know, and I will be happy to be in touch and inform you when I have every new article coming out. It will be my pleasure to let you know.
Thank you very much, Chris. I hope you do enjoy your stay in Zimbabwe, and thank you for the insights and the nuggets that we get.
That's my pleasure.
Thank you very much. Keep watching and keep following.